Welcome back to The Creepy Walker. Settle in, get comfortable, and let these stories carry you somewhere quiet. Every story here is made for one purpose, to help you drift off and fall asleep. No jump scares, just slow, dark, and cozy storytelling right before bed. If you enjoy what I do here, please like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment, letting me know where you're listening from. I love seeing where you all are from. I don't run any ads on this channel. Not a single one. These videos are completely free for you, and I want to keep it that way. If you'd ever like to support me financially, I have a Patreon. The link is pinned in the comments and in the description below. Even the smallest support means everything and keeps this channel alive. Now, get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let's walk. I need to explain what I was doing out there, because it sounds stranger than it was at the time. It was 2009. I worked for a small environmental firm out of Baton Rouge. Not a big outfit, just 4 of us who did contract work for energy companies that needed someone to sign off on their site compliance. My job was to go out to wherever they were drilling or blasting, collect water samples from the nearby creeks and runoff channels, document the numbers, and write a report saying whether or not the contamination levels were inside the acceptable range. Most of the time they were. When they were not, I wrote that too, and then someone above me decided what to do about it. I was not making policy. I was just collecting data and writing it down. That was the whole job. The site near Millers Fork County was a short contract. 7 days, maybe 8. I was subcontracted through a company I had worked with twice before. They handled the logistics, meaning they arranged where I slept and ate. What that meant in practice was a temporary worker camp set up on a cleared patch of land about 2 miles from the blasting zone. Maybe 30 workers total at any given time, rotating in depending on the schedule. Drill operators, equipment techs, a couple of guys who just moved things from one place to another all day. I shared a trailer with 2 of the drill operators. I did not know them before the job. One of them, the one in the bunk closest to the door, clipped his fingernails in the main area and left the clippings on the floor. Every night, I stepped on them in the dark more than once. He was not a bad person, just someone who did not think about other people occupying the same space. The other one slept with headphones in, and I never had a real conversation with him. We coexisted. That was fine. I had done worse. The camp itself was exactly what you would expect. Trailers lined up in 2 rows, a generator running most of the day, a prefab building in the middle that served as a mess hall and had a cook who came in from a town about 40 minutes away. She drove out every morning and drove back every evening unless the weather was bad enough that she stayed. She was probably 50, very efficient, did not talk much. My first night she told me not to walk toward the lower creek after dark because the locals dumped trash there. She said it the same way she said everything else, flat and quick, like she was listing ingredients. I did not think much of it at the time. Most evenings the men drank behind the equipment sheds, out past where the diesel smell was strongest. I went a couple of times, sat on a cooler, had a beer. Nobody bothered me. Nobody included me either. I was the outside contractor, which meant I was there to document things they would rather not have documented. So there was always a small amount of distance that both sides maintained without talking about it. That was also fine. I was used to it. The creek I needed to sample was maybe a quarter mile from the south end of camp. I went out twice a day, morning and afternoon, collected from 4 points, logged the readings in a field notebook, and came back. The numbers were elevated, but not dramatically so. I was expecting to write a report that recommended a follow-up inspection in 6 months. That was probably what was going to happen. By Thursday I had been there 4 nights. Women kept appearing at the camp. Not in any organized way. One at a time, usually in the late afternoon or early evening, sometimes after dark. They would come in from the direction of the road and walk toward wherever the most people were. They were looking for cigarettes, rides, work, food, anything. They all looked like they had been outside for a while. Dirty jeans, cracked hands. That flat look people get when they have been moving from place to place for long enough that they stop expecting much from wherever they land. I noticed them the way you notice something that repeats. The first one I thought nothing of. The second one I thought was maybe a girlfriend of one of the workers. By the third I was watching how the camp responded to them. And what I noticed was that the workers mostly ignored them the way you ignore background noise. But the supervisors went quiet. Not tense. Not reactive. Just quiet in a specific way. The way people go quiet when something is happening that they already know about and have already decided how to feel about. Nobody asked the women to leave. Nobody offered them much either. They drifted in and drifted out. I did not connect any of this to what the cook had said about the lower creek. I just noticed it the same way I noticed other things about the camp that did not add up neatly, but also did not seem like my business. Thursday evening, a girl sat outside my trailer eating crackers from a pack she had gotten from the vending machine near the mess hall. She was maybe 20. She had dirt worked into the creases of her fingers, the way you get when you have been outside long enough that washing does not fully get it out anymore. She kept scratching the side of her neck with 2 fingers, not like something itched, more like a habit. And after a while there was a thin line of dried blood where she had been doing it. I did not ask her anything. She did not explain herself. After a while she said something about the yellow trucks, whether they were running that night. I said I thought probably yes, because the blasting schedule had them out most nights. She nodded slowly, not like she was relieved, more like she was confirming something she already knew. She told me not to answer if someone knocked after midnight. She said it the same way the cook had told me about the lower creek, like it was practical information, like she was telling me not to leave food out because of animals. Then she was gone. I did not see her walk away. I just looked up and she was not there. I went to bed around 10. I left the notebook on the small table next to my bunk, and I lay there for a while going over the day's numbers in my head, which is something I do when I cannot sleep. Just run through the data to make sure I have not missed anything. The numbers were not interesting enough to keep me awake for long. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of engines. Not trucks. The sound was lighter and more scattered. ATVs, 2 or 3 of them, moving between the trailers. I could hear the gravel under the tires. I lay still and listened. Voices. Not many. Casual in tone, not loud. The kind of voices that are not trying to be quiet, but are also not in any hurry. I heard boots on wet ground. I heard something metallic shift, maybe a door or a gate, I was not sure. Then someone tried my door handle. Not hard, just a single test, the handle turning as far as it goes, and then releasing. The latch held. I had not locked it on purpose, it was just one of those doors that locks when you close it. I did not move. About 30 seconds later someone knocked. Soft knocking. Polite, almost. A man's voice came through the door, low and even, asking if I had seen the girl. I did not answer. There was a pause, longer than felt comfortable. Then the sound of boots on gravel again, moving away, and after another minute, where 2 of the ATVs moved off in the direction of the lower end of camp. I lay there until it was fully light outside. I could hear the generator start up, which meant it was close to 5:30. I heard the cook's car pull in sometime after 6. I got up. I went to the mess hall. I got coffee. The cook was working the same as any other morning. I tried to ask her about the lower creek in a way that was not too direct. I said I had heard ATVs out there late, and asked if that was normal. She did not stop what she was doing. She said sometimes the locals came through at night, and it was better not to get involved. I finished my coffee. I went out and collected my morning samples. The water at point 3 was worse than it had been the previous 2 days, a meaningful jump in the numbers. I wrote it down. I took photos of the sample jars and the surrounding bank. There was fresh tire track in the mud along the far side of the creek, wide tires, and something had been dragged from the bank down toward the water, a wide flat mark in the mud. I photographed that too. I wrote in the notes that I had observed vehicle activity near the sample site overnight, and that the disturbance appeared recent. I did not write down what I thought the drag mark was from. I did not actually know. I still do not know for certain. That afternoon I called the main office from my car with the windows up. I said I was seeing some things at the site that made me want to wrap up early, and that I had enough data to complete the report. They said fine, come back Friday. I packed my equipment that evening. My 2 trailer roommates were not there. I left before the dinner hour. I drove 4 hours back to Baton Rouge without stopping. The report I filed was about water contamination. The numbers I included were accurate. I put the photograph of the tire tracks and the drag mark in a separate folder on my computer, and I wrote a note to myself that said I should probably send it to someone, but I did not know who specifically, and I was not sure what exactly I would say it was evidence of. I looked up Millers Fork County a few times over the following months. There was not much to find. A local paper that had maybe 1 new article a week. Nothing about the camp. Nothing about missing persons. Nothing I could connect to anything I had seen. Eventually I stopped looking. Not because I resolved it in my head, just because looking was not producing anything. I still have the photographs. They are in a folder on an external drive I keep in a desk drawer. I have thought about what to do with them maybe a dozen times since 2009, and I have not come up with a good answer. The drag mark could have been equipment. The tire tracks were just tire tracks. What I have is a photograph of mud and a note I wrote to myself that does not say much. The girl outside the trailer, the one eating crackers, I do not know what happened to her. I have no way of knowing. I did not even get a good look at her face. I think about the way she said not to answer the door. Not scared when she said it. Just flat, like she had already worked out what the options were, and that was the only useful piece of information she had to offer. That part one think about more than the rest of it. My brother called me 3 weeks after our mother's funeral. We hadn't talked much in between. A few texts, mostly logistical stuff about the estate. He suggested a camping trip. 3 days, somewhere up north, just the two of us. He said being outside helped him think less. That was how he put it. Not think more clearly. Just think less. I wasn't sure what to do with that, but I said yes anyway because he was my brother and we had just buried our mother, and saying no felt wrong. His name is Daniel. He is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one who fixed things. Bikes, arguments, bad days. If something was broken, he would just quietly work on it until it wasn't. That was the kind of person he was. After our dad left, he basically became the steady thing in the house. Not in a dramatic way. He was just there and reliable. And if he said something would be fine, it usually was. I trusted him more than almost anyone. That year, after Mom got sick and then died, something in him had slowed down. Not in a depressed way, not exactly. More like a clock that was still running, but had lost a few seconds a day for a long time until you finally noticed it was off. He would be in the middle of a sentence and just stop. Not lose his train of thought. Stop. Like he had decided the rest of it wasn't necessary. He smiled more than he used to, but not at anything specific. Just at the air in front of him sometimes. I told myself it was grief. I told myself I was probably doing strange things too, and just not noticing. We drove up in his truck. About 4 hours, most of it on roads that got smaller and less traveled as we went. He had picked the spot. I didn't know the area. He said it was somewhere he had been before, years ago, that it was good and quiet and far enough out that we wouldn't run into anyone. That sounded fine to me. That sounded like exactly what both of us needed. We got there in the early afternoon. It was a clearing off an old logging road, no sign marking it, just a gap in the trees where the road widened and the ground flattened out. The pines around it were tall and close together, and they blocked a lot of the sky. The light that came through was thin, almost gray, even though it wasn't overcast. He had been there before, so he knew where to set the tent, where to put the cooler, where to build the fire ring. I just helped where he pointed me. We got camp set up in under an hour. There was no signal on either of our phones. We hadn't passed another vehicle in the last 40 minutes of driving. That first night was fine. He cooked sausages over the fire and burned them, and we ate them anyway. He made coffee in a small pot and burned that too. He didn't seem to notice or didn't mind. He sat and looked at the fire while he chewed, and once or twice he smiled at something I couldn't see. I watched him more than I watched the fire. I kept waiting for him to say something about Mom, something real, but he didn't. We just sat there. It got cold, and we went to sleep. I woke up sometime in the night, and the cooler was gone. Not gone, but gone from where we had put it. I looked around the campsite for a minute, thinking maybe I had just forgotten where we left it, but no. I grabbed the flashlight and walked out toward the road and found it maybe 30 yards away, sitting right at the edge of the gravel, lid open, ice still inside, nothing taken. I stood there for a while trying to understand how it got there. I carried it back. In the morning I told Daniel. He nodded slowly and said I must have put it there while unloading the truck and just not remembered. He said it in a patient way, like he was helping me work something out. I had unloaded the cooler and carried it to the campsite and set it down next to the tent. I knew that. I could picture it. But I didn't argue because I didn't have a better explanation, and it was early and I was still half asleep. The second day the folding shovel went missing. I noticed it around midday. We had brought it in case we needed to dig a hole to bury waste. It had been leaning against the side of the truck. I looked around camp and didn't find it, and then walked the perimeter a little and found it leaning against a stump about 20 feet past the tree line. Handle up, blade down, carefully placed. Not dropped. Placed. Later that afternoon, my boots were gone from outside the tent. I found them set on the ground about 15 feet away, side by side, toes pointed toward the trees. The way you might set them if you were being neat about it. Each time Daniel was patient with me. Each time he suggested a reasonable explanation. I had moved them without thinking. I had put them there and forgotten. He didn't say any of this in an accusing way. He said it calmly and waited, and then moved on. That patience made it worse somehow. It had a quality to it that I couldn't put my finger on. Like the patience wasn't coming from a kind place. Like it had a purpose. That evening he asked me if I had ever sleepwalked. He asked it the way you ask something you already know the answer to. I told him I hadn't, not as far as I knew. He nodded and looked at the fire and left a long pause, and then said some people don't know they do it. I have never sleepwalked. There is no history of it, no incident, no one who ever told me I had. I lay in the tent that night listening to him breathe and thinking about the cooler and the boots and the shovel and trying to make it make sense. I couldn't. Rain came in after dark. I woke up at some point, I don't know what time, and the tent zipper was open about 6 inches. Not all the way. Just enough. The cold came in through it. I lay still for a minute and looked at the gap, and then looked over at Daniel. He was in his sleeping bag, facing away from me, breathing slow and steady. I got up to use the bathroom. Outside, the fire had been rebuilt. I want to be specific about this because there's a difference between a fire that has been tended and a fire that has been rebuilt. The coals had been arranged differently. Dry kindling had been put under fresh wood in a way that takes a few minutes to do properly. The stones around the ring had been moved, some of them, rearranged so the circle was tighter and more even. Someone had worked on it. Recently. The wood was still catching. Daniel was asleep in the tent. I stood there looking at the fire for a while. Then I looked up and out past the edge of the camp, where the light from the fire reached into the first few feet of the trees. There was orange survey ribbon tied around nearly every trunk I could see. Not on one or two. Nearly every one of them. The kind of ribbon you see when land is being marked for something. It was tied at about eye level loops of it, some of them fluttering a little in what little air was moving. I don't know when it was put there. It wasn't there when we set up camp. I was certain of that because I had walked that perimeter when we first arrived, just looking around, and there was nothing on those trees. I went back in the tent. I lay there for a long time. Daniel's breathing didn't change. I watched the orange glow from the fire come through the tent wall and thought about who could have tied that ribbon and when. There was nobody else out there. We had passed no one. There were no other vehicles. The road didn't seem like it got any real traffic. It had just been us for 2 days. I thought about Daniel getting up in the night. I thought about how heavy he sleeps, or how he appears to sleep. I thought about the tent zipper already open when I woke up. I thought about how every missing thing had been carefully placed somewhere visible, somewhere I would find it without too much trouble, like someone was making a point, but stopping just short of making it clearly. I thought about how he had suggested the trip, how he had picked the spot, how he knew it from before. I thought about the things he said that year after Mom died. Not the big things, the small ones. How he would say something that didn't connect to anything. How sometimes when I called him, I had the feeling he was waiting for me to say something specific and was disappointed when I didn't. How once on the phone, he had said she always liked you better and then immediately moved on to something else before I could respond, like he hadn't said it at all. I don't know what he was doing out there. I don't know if it was him. That is the honest answer. I still don't know. In the morning, everything looked normal. He made burned coffee. He was quiet and slow the way he had been the whole trip. We packed up and drove back, and he barely talked the whole 4 hours. When he dropped me off, he said we should do it again sometime. He said it like he meant it. I said maybe. I haven't gone anywhere with him since. I don't have a clear reason I could explain to someone. Just that I kept thinking about that fire, rebuilt in the middle of the night, and all that orange ribbon on those trees, and how careful it all looked, and how he slept right through it or seemed to. I still don't know which one it was. My son is 10. His name is Eli. I want to say that first because everything else only matters if you know who he is to me. Eli is the kind of kid who gets obsessed with one thing at a time and does it until he either gets good at it or loses interest completely. Last spring it was origami. Before that, it was memorizing world capitals. This past month, it had been card tricks. Not the flashy kind. The kind where you have to practice the same hand movement 200 times before it looks like anything. He had a beat-up deck he carried everywhere, and he was always dropping it and always picking it up without complaint and going right back to whatever he was working on. That is a thing about him. He does not give up easily. His mother and I are not together. We have not been for 2 years. The arrangement is fine mostly. We do not fight in front of him, and we try not to say things about each other that would stick. But she had been saying for a while that I did not do enough with him. Not enough of what she called normal stuff. She did not mean that cruelly, I think. She just meant that when Eli was with me, I let him do his thing, and I did my thing, and we were together, but maybe not always doing something together. That is probably fair. So when she said it again in March, I decided I would take him camping. I had gone as a kid a few times with my uncle. I remembered it being fine. Nothing special, but fine. I found a campground about 2 hours from where I live. It is called Whitmore Flats. It sits alongside an old quarry that has not been used since the 90s. There is a lake nearby that you can fish in, and a few trails, and a small check-in booth that a woman runs out of a converted shed. I called ahead. I booked 2 nights. I bought a tent I did not know how to assemble yet, and a cooler, and told Eli the week before, and he said cool, and went back to his cards. The drive up was fine. Eli sat in the back, because he likes the back. He was working on a false cut, and dropping the deck about every 5 minutes, and fishing it out from between the seats. I played music I liked, and he did not complain about it, and I did not complain about the cards. It was a good drive. The kind where not much happens, but you feel okay. We got there in the early afternoon. The campground had maybe 8 or 10 sites, and almost all of them were empty. It was a Thursday and still early in the season. Cold enough that I could see my breath when I got out of the car. The trees were mostly bare, but there was new green at the ends of the branches. The quarry was visible through the tree line. Just gray rock going down into water that was the color of old glass. One RV was parked near the trees, over at the far end of the loop. It was bigger than it needed to be for one person. Nice looking, white with gray trim. Not new, but well kept. An older man was sitting in a folding chair outside of it when we pulled in. Gray beard, maybe late 60s. He had on hiking clothes that looked like they came out of a catalog. Nothing on them worn or faded or dirty. He waved when we pulled up. I waved back. Eli was already out of the car, checking out the fire pit. I spent about an hour putting the tent up. Eli helped for a while, and then lost interest and went to explore the area between our site and the lake. I could see him from where I was working. He stayed in sight. The man in the RV did not come over. I noticed him once sitting in his chair reading. That was all. Before sunset, Eli caught a fish. A small bass. He was very proud of it and wanted to show it to someone, and I was not enough, apparently. He wanted to walk it over to the RV and show the man. I did not think much of it. Old guy camping alone, probably glad for the company. We walked over. The man looked at the fish and said something like, "Good work, Eli." And I thought, okay, he heard me call his name earlier. I had said his name a few times while we were setting up. Sound carries out there. I let it go. We ate dinner. Hot dogs, chips, the kind of meal that is only good outside. Eli tried to show me the false cut, and almost got it. After it got dark, we sat by the fire, and I told him about going camping with my uncle, the parts one remembered. He listened and asked a few questions. The fire went out around 9, and it was cold enough that we went into the tent. Eli fell asleep fast. I lay there listening to him breathe, and to the sounds outside, which were normal sounds, wind and animals and the water somewhere. I got up around 10 to use the shower block at the other end of the campground. It is maybe a 2-minute walk. I was gone, I would guess 15 minutes. Maybe 20. When I got back, Eli was awake in his sleeping bag. He was not upset. He was just talking, the way he does sometimes when he is processing something. He said the neighbor had come by. He had sat down at our picnic table and talked with Eli for a while. Eli said the man knew things about him. About the nightmares. Eli has had bad dreams on and off for about a year. Not terrible. Just frequent enough that his mother and I had talked to his doctor about it. No, cause just one of those things kids go through. He did not need medication or therapy, the doctor said. Just time. But I had not told the man that. I had not talked to the man at all beyond waving, and the 30 seconds at the fish moment. Eli said the man told him bad dreams were normal after accidents. I asked what accident. Eli said he did not know. He thought maybe the man had us confused with someone else. I do not remember what I said next. Something like probably or yeah, maybe. I did not want to scare him. I told him to go back to sleep, and he did. I did not sleep. I lay there trying to think through it. Maybe the man had overheard more than I thought. Maybe we had talked about something near the car before we drove up. I went back through the week. I could not think of anything. Eli had not been in an accident. There was no accident. There had been a moment last fall when a car had braked hard near him at a crosswalk, and I had grabbed him, and it was close, and it frightened both of us. But it was nothing that we called an accident. We did not talk about it much after. How would a stranger know even that? I stayed on my back and listened. At some point it started getting light outside. That gray before the sun comes up. I heard footsteps in the gravel near the tent. Close. Right along the side of it. I unzipped the flap. The man was about 15 feet away, walking back toward his RV. He had something tucked under his arm. Long, wrapped in dark cloth or maybe a jacket. I could not see clearly. He did not look back, but he raised his free hand and waved. I looked at Eli, still asleep. I looked at the picnic table. The night before I had left my keys there. I do it every time I camp because there is nowhere else that makes sense, and I never had a reason not to. They were gone from the table. I looked in the car. The doors were unlocked, which I had not left them. No keys. I went back to the tent to check on Eli. The keys were inside the tent, next to Eli's sleeping bag. Lined up. Not in a pile. Not tossed. Lined up. The way you would put them if you were being careful. I picked them up. I held them. I stood in the tent and looked at my son sleeping, and I tried to understand what I was looking at. I do not know how long I stood there. A while. Then I started packing up the tent. I did it quietly. Eli woke up and asked what was happening, and I said we needed to head back early. I said I had something I forgot about. He accepted that. He is usually okay with changed plans. He started gathering his things and asking if we could stop somewhere for breakfast on the way back. I had to walk past the RV to get to the exit road. I did not look directly at it. I looked at it with my peripheral vision, the way you look at something you are pretending not to see. The folding chair was empty. The RV windows were dark. I put everything in the car and we left. I drove fast until we were back on the main road, and then I drove the speed limit because I did not want to get pulled over, and I did not want Eli to know I was driving fast. He asked about breakfast twice, and then fell asleep. I called the campground when we got back to the city. The woman in the check-in shed answered. I asked about the man in the RV. She said he had checked in 3 days before us. Paid cash. Gave a name. I asked her what the name was, and she spelled it out, and it meant nothing to me. I asked if she knew anything else about him. She said he had asked about other bookings when he checked in, whether the campground would be full or quiet. She said she told him it would be mostly empty that weekend because it was early in the season and only one other group had reserved a site. One other group. She did not seem to understand why I was asking. I thanked her and hung up. I have not figured out what to do with that. I have thought about calling the police, but I do not know what I would report exactly. A man moved my keys. A man talked to my kid. A man knew things he should not have known and was up before sunrise carrying something I could not identify. None of that is a crime I could name. Eli has not mentioned it since. He went back to his card tricks. I keep thinking about the nightmares thing. About him saying accidents. About the fact that whatever that man knew or thought he knew, or was pretending to know, he said it to my 10-year-old while I was 2 minutes away in the shower. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if he wanted anything in the way I mean that word. I don't know what the thing under his arm was. I've thought about it enough times that I start to feel like I'm inventing details, so I try to stop. Eli asked last week if we could go back sometime. He liked fishing, he said. He caught a bass. I told him maybe. I took the job in late October. The listing said seasonal maintenance, minimal experience needed, which meant I qualified. The campground was called Pinecrest, though I never saw a sign that said that anywhere on the property. Dale told me the name on my first day, and then never mentioned it again. Dale had been there longer than the ownership had. He knew which faucets needed a half-turn before they'd shut off, and which trails flooded when the creek ran high. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was practical. Where the fuel cans were stored, which padlocks needed WD-40 because they'd freeze in the cold. That sort of thing. The campground had closed after Labor Day. My job was mostly walking the sites each morning, checking the shower block, making sure nobody had left a fire going. The ownership was a company out of Portland that sent emails and never called. They paid direct deposit every 2 weeks, and I didn't ask a lot of questions. By October, the rain was steady. Not hard, just constant. The kind that soaks everything slowly until you stop noticing you're wet. The cedar bark turned dark, and the whole valley held this smell, green but also something under it. Like the ground was working on something. People still got in. Hunters, mostly. A few carloads of kids. I'd find their stuff in the morning. Bottle caps. Tire tracks through soft mud near the gate. I'd note it and move on. It wasn't my job to catch anyone, just to document. The first thing I noticed was the ashes. Site 11, first week of November. A fire ring with ashes buried under a thin layer of wet dirt. Someone had scattered dirt over them the way you would if you wanted the site to look unused. The ashes were still faintly warm when I put my hand over them. Not warm enough to feel heat, just less cold than the ground around them. I logged it and kept going. The next morning, Site 7 had the same thing. Buried ashes, barely covered. And 3 soup cans lined up on the log bench beside the fire ring, rinsed clean, labels still on. Chicken noodle. 2 of them. The cans were sitting upright, and even like someone had set them there deliberately. I stood and looked at them for a while. Then I kept walking. After that, I started looking more carefully each morning. Something was different about these sites. No tire tracks leading in. No tent stakes, no gear, nothing left behind. Just the ashes and sometimes the cans, and once a child's shoe hanging from a low branch with the laces tied together through the loop of each eyelet, so it hung flat. I took the shoe down and put it in the office lost and found box. Nobody ever claimed it. Dale saw me logging one of the sites and said to stop bothering with Site 14. He said they move around anyway. I thought he meant raccoons getting into things or deer. He had a way of saying things that were practical, but not quite complete, like he expected you to fill in the rest yourself. I kept checking Site 14. Then the generators went missing. We had 3 of them in the storage shed behind the office. One morning the shed door was latched, but 2 were gone. I searched the whole property. Found the first one down by the dry creek bed, almost half a mile from the shed. Someone had carried it or dragged it. It was sitting upright in the creek gravel with the fuel cap set beside it. Not lost, just removed and placed next to the base. The second one was on the picnic table at Site 9. It was sitting with the exhaust end facing into the trees. Neither one had been turned on. The fuel caps had been taken off both of them and set down carefully nearby. I carried them back to the shed. I put new padlocks on the doors. Dale didn't sleep in the office after that. He started sitting in his truck instead, parked at the far end of the lot near the front gate. He left the windows cracked even when it was cold enough to see your breath. When I walked past in the mornings, he'd be awake. I never asked him about it. A few nights later, I was doing a last walk before locking the shower block. It was around midnight, maybe a little after. The rain had stopped for once, and the air was very still. I had my flashlight, but the moon was enough to walk by. Every site had a lantern on. Not every lantern we owned. Our lanterns were in the equipment room. These were other ones. Camp lanterns, the kind you'd buy at a sporting goods store. Set in the middle of each picnic table with the flame turned low. I counted 12 of them from where I stood near the shower block. All burning. All low. I walked toward the nearest one, Site 3. The lantern was sitting on the table centered between the 2 benches. It was a green propane lantern, older model, the mesh inside yellowed. I stood next to it and looked at the woods past the site boundary. I couldn't see anything. From somewhere in the trees, I heard metal moving. A slow sound, like a camp chair being unfolded, that specific creak and click of the frame locking open. Then another one. Then another. Each one a few seconds apart, evenly spaced, moving away from me from the sound of it, or at least getting no closer. I went back to the shower block and finished locking it. Then I walked to the office and called the non-emergency line and told them I thought trespassers were on the property. The deputy who answered said he'd send someone when he could. Nobody came that night. In the morning, every lantern was gone. No propane canisters left behind. Nothing on the tables. I walked the perimeter of the property along the fence line looking for a gap big enough to pull gear through and found 2 places where the chain link had been lifted from the bottom and bent back carefully. Both gaps were big enough to pass a lantern through. Both showed signs of repeated use. The ground under them was packed down in a way that takes time. I told Dale. He listened, and then looked past my shoulder out toward the tree line the way he did sometimes. He chewed his gum. He said he'd been doing this job for 11 years. He didn't say anything else after that, and I didn't push him. I stayed through the end of November because I needed the money. I kept doing my rounds. I stopped logging the buried ashes because it didn't seem to matter. Whoever was using the sites wasn't leaving damage. They weren't breaking anything. They were just there, and then not there, and they were careful about the not there part in a way that took effort. I don't know how many people it was. Could have been one. Could have been more. The way the lanterns spread across the whole campground at once made me think more, but I don't know for certain. I left the job when the contract ended in December. Dale was still there when I left. He was in his truck. I don't have a way to explain the chairs. The sound of them. How many there were, or how far it went before it stopped. I've thought about it, and I don't have anything that fully makes sense to me. Someone was out there in the dark opening chairs in a line, and I don't know why a person would do that. She'd been planning it for 2 months. She had a whole folder on her phone of other people's lake ice shots, and she'd talk about the light at that hour like it was something she needed to get to before someone else did. I'd been on worse trips. I said yes. We drove up the day before and made camp before the sun went down. The shoreline was flat and open. Snow packed hard in most places, softer near the water where the wind hadn't touched it the same way. The ice went out maybe 40 feet before it stopped looking solid. Past that it was darker, and you could see where it had buckled and refrozen in ridges. She set up her gear inside the tent and went through her batteries twice to make sure they were charged. She hummed while she did it. Not a song, just a sound she made when she was working. I ate and read on my phone until the signal dropped. Then I just lay there listening to the lake. There was movement under the ice at night. Not loud, but steady, like pressure shifting somewhere below. I'd never heard anything like it before that trip, and I don't have a better way to describe it. Deep scraping. Slow. We turned everything off around 9 and tried to sleep early for her sunrise window. I got maybe a few hours. I woke up needing to go and unzipped the tent slow, so I wouldn't wake her. It was around 1 in the morning. The moon was out and high, and the snow was bright enough that my eyes adjusted fast. I walked a few steps from the tent and stopped. There were tracks in the snow. They went from the direction of the shore toward the tent and then curved around it. Not paw prints. They weren't boots either. Long dents in the snow, each one separate, and the space between them was wrong. 6 feet maybe. 7 in some places. Like whatever made them had only touched down every so often, which doesn't make sense if something is walking. I crouched and put my flashlight on them. The edges were soft, not sharp. They'd been there a little while. I was still crouched looking at them when I heard the tent zip open behind me. She was asking why I'd been walking around the tent. I told her I'd just come out, that I'd just stepped out that second. She didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear her hands moving against each other, her gloves. Then she said she'd been watching someone walk around the tent for 10 minutes. Maybe more. She'd thought it was me. I stood up and looked at the shoreline. Both directions, nothing. It was open ground for as far back as I could see. The nearest trees were well behind us, nowhere close enough to matter. The moon was bright enough that I wasn't missing much. Then something moved out near the pressure cracks. Far out, near where the ice changed color. It crossed from left to right. I don't know how long it took. Less than a second. I almost thought my eyes had done something, had slipped or missed a frame somehow. There was no shape I could hold on to. Just motion and then a hard spray of snow where it had been, still settling when I looked at it. No sound with it. None. A second or two after that, the ice made a noise like something had hit it from below. A deep flat crack that I felt more than heard. She grabbed my sleeve and didn't let go. I looked back down at the ground around the tent. The tracks had doubled. Same pattern, same spacing, but twice as many lines in the snow now. I hadn't heard anything. She hadn't heard anything. There was no wind. We went back in the tent, and she didn't argue about it, and she never argues about anything. I sat with my back against the gear and watched the mesh of the tent door. The moon was bright enough that the mesh held shadow. If anything came close, I'd see the shape of it, or I thought I would. I don't know how long we sat there. Long enough that my legs went stiff. Nothing touched the tent. Nothing came close that I could see. After a while, the sounds from under the ice got louder, or maybe I was just more awake and paying closer attention. That same slow pressure. I kept thinking about what 40 feet of dark water feels like from below looking up. That's not a useful thought, but it kept coming back. By 4 or so, I'd half convinced myself the tracks had been there before we set up camp, and we'd just missed them in the dark. That made less sense the more I thought about it, because we'd walked that ground ourselves coming in, and neither of us had seen them. She hadn't said anything, and she notices things, especially outside. But I kept landing on it anyway. The way you do when nothing else fits. She didn't try for her sunrise shots. She didn't say why, and I didn't ask. We packed in the gray before the light came up properly. She moved her cameras like they were heavy. She usually doesn't handle them that way. On the way out, I looked back at the tent site once. The tracks were still there in the snow around where the tent had been. Still that same long spacing. Still going in a circle. I counted what I could see from where I was standing and stopped counting. We drove most of the way home without talking. She had her camera bag in her lap, and her hands rested on top of it. At some point, she said she didn't think the light would have been right anyway. I said probably not. That was basically it. I've looked up what could make tracks like that. I've gone through the usual things. Large birds, deer moving weird in deep snow. I've read about ice behavior on the Great Lakes, and what makes the sounds it makes and how it can move and shift. None of it covers what was out there, or how fast it covered that distance, or why the tracks doubled without either of us hearing anything land. I'm not saying it was something it couldn't be. I'm saying I don't know what it was. She hasn't mentioned the trip since we got home. She still has the photos she took during the day, before dark, but she hasn't posted any of them. The folder of other people's ice shots is still on her phone. I've seen it there. She just hasn't opened it in a while. My wife Elena and I had been together for 11 years and married for 7 of them. She is the kind of person who makes plans for things that I would never think to plan. Birthdays, trips, small celebrations I would forget were even coming. She keeps track. She remembers what matters. For our 7th anniversary, she booked us 2 nights at a glamping site on the Northern California coast, about 3 hours from where we live. She had found it 6 months earlier and kept the tab open on her browser until it was time to book. That is the kind of thing she does. I want to be clear about what glamping means at this place, because when I heard the word, I thought it would be silly. It was not silly. These were large white canvas tents set up on wooden platforms along a bluff above the Pacific. Each tent had a real bed inside, a small wood stove, lanterns, and a rug on the floor. There was a communal wash station in the middle of the site, with running water and mirrors. The tents were spaced far enough apart that you could not hear anyone else. During the day, you could see the ocean from your bed through the tent flap. Elena had picked it because she wanted one weekend without our phones, without screens, without the particular kind of tiredness that comes from a week of staring at things. I understood that. We both had jobs that kept us inside and online, and I think we had both been feeling it for a while without saying so. We drove up on a Friday afternoon. It was July 2021, during that heat wave that moved through the whole West Coast. In the valley where we live, it had been over 100 degrees for 5 days. Even up on the coast, where it is usually cold and damp, the air was warm and strange. It smelled like hot rock and salt. When we got out of the car at the check-in area, the wind was blowing, but it was a warm wind, which did not feel right for that part of the coast. The person who checked us in pointed out the lantern path to our tent, explained how the wood stove worked, and told us there were 6 other tents on the property. Not all of them occupied that weekend. There was a couple 2 tents down from us. There may have been someone near the far end of the path. We did not see anyone else the first day. The first day was good. That is important to say. We opened the wine we had brought. Elena found a metal cup in the tent and used that instead of a glass because she thought it was funny. We sat in the camp chairs outside and watched the water. The ocean looked flat and blue. You could see a long way. There were no boats. There were birds. We ate cheese and crackers and talked about things we had not talked about in months. She fell asleep early, and I sat outside a little longer and watched the light go off the water. It was a normal good evening. Nothing was wrong. I noticed something at the wash station that night while I was brushing my teeth. The sound of the waves. I stood there for a while because it took me a moment to understand what felt off about it. The waves were hitting at the same interval. Not almost the same. The same. Same gap between each one. Same volume when they landed. I stood there and counted, and they were perfectly even. I had grown up going to the beach. Waves are not like that. Waves come in sets. They vary. These did not vary. I finished brushing my teeth and walked back to the tent. Elena was already asleep. I told myself I was tired, and that tiredness makes you notice things in the wrong way, makes patterns where there are none. I got into bed and listened, and I fell asleep eventually. The second day was also fine, warmer than the first. The fog that usually sits on that coast in the morning burned off early. Elena and I walked along the bluff path after breakfast. The path runs close to the edge in some places, close enough that you can look straight down at the rocks and the water moving around them. The rock there is dark and jagged. The tide charts posted near the check-in office said the rocks made the area dangerous for boats after dark. We read that in passing and kept walking. In the afternoon, we read books in the tent with the flap open. It was a good day. I did not hear anything strange during the day. The couple 2 tents down from us had been friendly when we passed them on the path. They smiled. They had a small cooler outside their tent and a pair of hiking boots drying on the platform railing. Normal. That evening around 7 or 8, after we had eaten dinner, I heard a car engine start. I looked out and saw them carrying bags to an SUV parked on the gravel near the path entrance. They did not say anything to each other that I could hear. They moved quickly, but not like something was wrong exactly. More like they had already decided something and were just doing it. They left both of their lanterns burning on the path outside their tent. I watched their headlights go down the access road. Elena asked what happened, and I said I did not know. Maybe something came up. She accepted that and went back to her book. By 11 the fog had come in. Not the thin kind that blurs things. The thick kind that sits on you. The ocean was completely gone behind it. You could hear it, but you could not see it or the cliffs or anything more than a few feet from the tent platform. The lanterns along the path were just dim orange smears in it. That was when the horn started. I do not know what else to call it. A horn. One note. Low. It came from somewhere out on the water, or I thought it did, but in that fog it was hard to know where sound was coming from. It would go quiet for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and then sound again. It was not like a buoy. Buoys make a sound at regular intervals, and they have a particular hollow quality. This was lower and less hollow, and the gaps between sounds were not regular. Sometimes it was 3 minutes. Sometimes it was almost 7. I got up and walked toward the bluff edge with my flashlight. The beam did not reach anything. It just lit up fog. I stood there for a while listening. Then a second horn answered from somewhere below and closer, much closer, below the bluff. Not from the water, from the cliff face. And then a third one, this time from behind me, from the inland side, back toward the tents or beyond them. I turned around. I could not see the tents from where I was standing. Just fog and the faint glow from the lanterns on the path. Elena had come out of the tent with a blanket over her shoulders. She was standing on the platform looking out toward where I was. She raised her hand and pointed past me, out toward the water, and she was pointing at something specific, not vaguely, the way you point at something you can actually see. I turned back around. Below the fog line, down along the cliff face where the bluff drops to the rocks, there were pale lights. 6 or 7 of them. Moving. Not drifting exactly. Moving upward. Slowly. Evenly spaced. Going up the cliff face in a line where there was no path, and where no path could be. Not on that rock. Not on that angle. I am not going to say they were lights in a supernatural sense. They were lights. The same pale color as a phone screen or a headlamp set to its lowest setting. They moved the way lights move when they are carried by people, with a small natural sway. But there was no way to climb that section of bluff. I had looked at it in the daylight. It was vertical in places. Wet. The rock there comes apart when you press it. I turned off my flashlight. I do not know exactly why I did that. I just did it. The lights kept moving up. Elena came to stand next to me. She did not say anything. We stood there watching them. They were maybe 60 or 70 feet below the bluff top, when I noticed they were not going to reach the top in front of us. They were angled, moving up and also moving north along the cliff, toward the far end of the property where the bluff curved, toward the tents. I went back to our tent and started putting things into the bag. Not everything. I did not fold anything. I took the important things. Wallet, keys, Elena's medication from the front pocket of her bag. She came in behind me and started doing the same thing without me saying anything about it. We did not talk. We put on shoes. We left the lanterns on. The access road from the site down to the highway is unpaved and slow. I drove it as fast as I thought I could without losing control of the car. Elena had her window down and was looking behind us. I did not ask what she saw. She did not say. When we reached the highway, I turned south and drove. After maybe 20 minutes, I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station that was closed but had lights on outside. I turned the car off. We sat there for a while. I turned the car back on because it was still hot even at night, and I wanted the air going. We drove home that same night. Got in around 3 in the morning. I slept until noon. I looked up the site online the next week. It was still listed, still bookable. The reviews were normal. A few people mentioned the fog. Nobody mentioned anything else. I still think about the spacing of those waves. The couple who left their lanterns on. The way the lights moved, that angle, how even the gaps between them were. I have thought about it a lot, and I cannot put it together into something that makes sense. People could have been climbing the cliff. In the dark. In the fog. With the tide coming in. I do not know why they would do that or how, but people do strange things on coasts at night, and I am aware that I did not stay to find out what it was. Elena does not bring it up often. Once, a few months later, she mentioned the horns and said she thought they were probably a group of people, kayakers or swimmers signaling to each other. She said it in a way that suggested she had decided on that and did not want to discuss other options. I did not push on it. I do not know what was on that cliff. My sister Dara is 4 years older than me and has always been the one who decides things. Not in a mean way, just in the way some people are built. She decides and then she explains it to you, and by the end of the explanation, you are already doing the thing. She called me in late July and said I was coming to stay near her in New Mexico for a few weeks because I had lost my job in April and had not done much since then except sleep past noon and watch things on my phone until 3 in the morning. She was not wrong about any of that. She said she had found a program, a wilderness therapy program, and that she had already spoken to the director and that I was going to volunteer as an adult support participant, which meant I would hike and camp with a group of teenagers and one licensed guide for 10 days in the high desert outside Taos. She said it would give me structure. That was her word. Structure. She used it the way a doctor uses a word you have never heard before and says it like you already know what it means. I did not fight her on it. I did not have a strong reason not to go. My apartment was paid through August. I had nowhere I needed to be. I want to be honest about what I was expecting. I was expecting something hard and boring. Waking up early, carrying a pack, being hot, listening to teenagers complain. Maybe some group talks around a fire where a guide with a gentle voice asked everyone to name one feeling. I had done something like that in college for a semester, a ropes course job, and it felt like that. Manageable. Something to get through. Dara drove me out to the meeting point herself. A dirt lot at the edge of a state park with 2 portable toilets and a folding table with clipboards on it. She hugged me for a long time before she got back in her car, longer than she usually does. I think she was relieved I had shown up at all. I told her I would text when I had signal. She said okay and drove away, and I stood there with my pack and looked at the other people in the lot. There were 8 teenagers. I did not know any of them. They ranged from maybe 14 to 17. I could not tell exactly. A few of them sat on the ground. A few of them stood near their parents or guardians and did not say goodbye in any visible way. One boy, tall and thin, with very short hair, stood slightly apart from everyone else and kept tilting his face up a little, like he was checking the wind. Not constantly, just before he would shift his weight or look at something new. I noticed it and then filed it away as something kids do, nervous habits, and did not think more about it. The guide was a man named Eli. He was probably in his early 40s. He had the kind of face that is hard to read, not unfriendly, but not warm either. He ran through the safety talk quickly, not rushed exactly, just like someone who has said the same words enough times that they no longer hear them. He told us the camp moved every 2 days. He told us we would hike between 4 and 8 miles each day depending on terrain and group condition. He told us the water jugs were heavy and we would share the weight. He told us the rules, and the rules were clear. He did not explain why the camp moved or why we could not stay in one place. I did not ask. The first day was what I expected. Hot, dry, The air tasted like dust and something sharp underneath the dust, sage maybe, or something that grows in desert places that I do not have a name for. The scrub was low and gray-green. The ground was pale orange in the sun and brown in the shade. My boots were too new, and the back of my left heel was bad by the time we set up camp, which was just tarps tied to the larger scrub trees and sleeping pads on the ground. Eli set up his own shelter a little apart from the group, maybe 20 feet, and he cooked on a small stove while the rest of us ate from the pouches in our packs. Before we ate, he counted us. He stood at the edge of the group and pointed at each person one at a time. He did it slowly, his finger moving in small, deliberate arcs. He got to 8 and stopped, then added himself. 9. He said it was for safety. I thought it was for safety. After we ate, he counted again. Before we slept, he counted again. He did not make it feel strange. It was just the thing he did. The second day was harder because of my heel, and also because the wind had started, a dry, hot wind that pushed grit into everything and made talking feel like work. Most of the kids were quiet anyway. They walked, and they did not look at each other much. The tall, thin boy walked near the back most of the time. I was also near the back because of my heel. I did not speak to him, and he did not speak to me, but I noticed a few times that he tilted his face before he looked at something, the way he had done in the parking lot. I do not know what it meant. I still do not. That night the wind came back harder. It knocked one of the tarps loose at about 10 in the evening, pulled a stake clean out of the ground, and we spent almost an hour fixing it with everyone stumbling around in the dark using phone flashlights. Eli retied the knots himself, working fast and without a headlamp. While this was happening, I was near the tall, thin boy. I was holding the corner of the tarp. He was holding a stake. He leaned his head back the same way he always did, just slightly, and then in a voice that was not quite a whisper, but was not meant to carry, he said something. I caught the second half of it, which was about Eli doing something again. He was not talking to me. I do not know who he was talking to, maybe himself. Nobody answered him. I did not ask him what he meant. The tarp was fixed, and Eli told us to get to sleep. I was already half awake when Eli came around past midnight. He did not yell. He just spoke in a normal voice and said we should all stay in our sleeping areas until sunrise because one of the kids was confused. That was the word he used. Confused. He did not say which kid. He did not say anything else. I heard the sleeping bags shift around me, people waking up, and then going still. Nobody asked who was confused. Nobody asked anything. I thought someone had sleepwalked or panicked. It happens. I told myself that. What I could not explain, and what I lay there thinking about for most of the night, was that everyone had gone quiet in the particular way people go quiet when they have just been told something they already knew. Not surprised quiet. Just settling quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something is confirmed. I stayed awake because of the footsteps. Not because they were loud. Because they were steady and they kept going in wide, slow loops around the perimeter of the camp. I listened for them to stop or change, and they did not. They did not quicken. They did not stumble. Just the same weight and the same pace, out past the tarps and back around. I thought it was Eli keeping watch. I think it probably was Eli keeping watch. But I lay there counting the loops, and they went on for longer than anyone would need to do that, and they never moved toward the sound of anything. They just kept going around. Before the meal counts, I had thought the counts were routine. After the midnight, I started counting on my own. I did it the next morning, quiet in my head. 8 teenagers. Eli. 9. That matched what Eli said. It matched every time. Except Eli always paused. He would get partway through the count, and he would stop. His finger would stop midair. Then he would continue, and he would finish at 9. Every time. The pause was not because someone had moved. I watched carefully. Nobody moved. He just stopped, and then he went on, and he reached 9. I tried to think about what could cause a person to stop in the middle of counting, and then continue, and still get the right number. I tried to think if I had ever counted something and stopped, and then kept going. I could not remember doing it that way. When I count, I either count through, or I start over. I do not stop in the middle, hold my finger in the air, and then keep going. On the 4th day, there was a long flat stretch before lunch, and the kids spread out a little on the trail, loosely, and I found myself near Eli for about 20 minutes. He did not start a conversation. I did not start one, but I was close enough to watch him without making it obvious. He kept his eyes moving over the group the whole time, not in a nervous way, in the way a person watches something they are responsible for. He counted on his fingers when he thought I was looking at the trail. I saw it twice. Thumb, then index, then middle. He would stop. Then he would continue to 4, 5, 6, and he would stop. Then the rest. He always stopped in the same place. I do not know where in the count the pause landed. I could not tell which person corresponded to the pause because I was watching his hand and not his eyes. The afternoon of the 5th day, I counted the teenagers myself. I did it during the lunch stop when they were spread out between the rocks and the shade, some eating, some sitting. I counted 8. I counted again. 8. I went through each one in my head, the girl with the red braid, the 2 boys who always sat close but never talked, the one who cried every morning for about 10 minutes and then seemed fine, the tall thin one who tilted his face, and the 3 I had never quite sorted out from each other. 8. I was one of 9. 9 was correct. But I stood there and thought about it. I thought about the pause. I thought about the footsteps going in circles. I thought about what it would mean if the pause was not a pause, but a skip. If the number Eli was pausing before was a number he was not counting out loud. If there was a reason to keep a separate count inside the count everyone could see. That is not a thought I wanted to have. I did not sleep well for the rest of the trip. I told myself there was nothing wrong. I ate and I hiked, and I drank the warm water from the plastic jug, and I watched Eli count, and I watched the kids not look at each other, and I watched the thin boy tilt his face into the air before he said anything or looked at anything, and I kept my own count in my head every time. The count was always 8, and then me, and then Eli. 9. Eli's count always ended at 9. He always paused in the same place. He always finished with the same number. The last morning, before the vans came to take us back to the parking lot, Eli came around at dawn and started the count one more time. I was still in my sleeping bag, but not asleep. I heard him outside the tarp, his voice flat from the cold, going through the numbers. He got to some point in the middle, and he paused. Then he said 2 more words very softly. I was close enough to hear them. I am not going to try to guess what he meant by them, because I do not know. I just know what I heard. Then he finished the count, and he said 9, and he went to start the stove. In the van on the way back, I sat next to one of the boys I had never quite sorted out. He slept most of the ride. Dara was waiting in the parking lot. She looked at me, and I could tell she wanted to know how it was. I told her it was fine. She said she was glad. We drove to her place, and she made coffee, and we talked about other things. I have thought about the pause maybe 4 or 5 times since I got back. I have not come up with anything that makes it completely make sense. I probably should not have kept thinking about it as long as I did, which was most of the drive home, and then a few more times after that. But the pause was there, and it was always in the same place, and I counted 8 teenagers every time I counted, and Eli counted 9, and I do not fully know how to put those 2 things together in a way that settles it.